I'd first like to thank Vince Aletti for being here tonight. Vince, as you know, is an accomplished photography critic and the reviewer of photography for The New Yorker. His most recent endeavor of many is an edition published by Acme Studios of the rodeo work of Bruce of Los Angeles. He is also a faculty member in the graduate fashion photography program at SVA. Saul Leiter's work is in the collection of the Museum of Fine Arts in Houston, the Art Institute of Chicago, the Baltimore Museum of Art, the Victoria and Albert Museum, the National Gallery of Art in Australia, the Milwaukee Art Museum, the Yale University Art Gallery, on and on. He is represented by the Howard Greenberg Gallery. It's a great pleasure and an honor to have him here this evening and to share his thoughts with us. Please welcome Vince Aletti and Saul Leiter.
I wanted to just start, I'll sort of scroll through these images while we're talking. They're in no particular order. They're Saul Leiter's photographs, recently rediscovered, it seems, not shown or published before. So this is all new work that you'll have a chance to see while we're talking.
It's new old work.
New old work.
New
Yes.
old work.
I wanted to start out, I was thinking about when I first became aware of your work after the fashion work in Harper's Bazaar and after Martin Harrison wrote about you in his appearances book glowingly and put you in a really good fashion context. Jane Livingston did a 1992 book called The New York School, in which she placed you in the context of Lisette Modell, Helen Levitt, Diane Arbus, Richard Avedon, Robert Frank, Ouija, Leon Levinstein, Bruce Davidson, William Klein, and Alexei Brodovich. This seems to be, I remember thinking at the time that her claims for you were kind of inflated.
Were what?
Were sort of inflated.
Exaggerated.
Exaggerated.
Undeserved.
I was surprised that you were in this context. And
Yes.
of course, later I realized that not only was, she totally prescient about seeing you in that context and placing you in this context that, and I was totally mistaken for thinking that you didn't belong there. But I wondered what that meant to you to be placed alongside this, pantheon of people in a school that you probably were never a part of.
Well, I didn't, I always knew that I was good at what I did. And I am supposed to be, or have been described as being modest. But
And you're not.
in spite of being modest, I'm aware that I am whatever it is that I am, so that when I'm put into certain places, I am, I suppose, not surprised.
Oh.
I feel quite comfortable there.
Good. Well, I mean, because I thought that book was really historic in a certain way, that Jane Livingston's New York
Yes.
School, and it put you in a very important range of people, and then nothing much happened after that. Was that it was a while before you had, well, not too long actually, before you had an exhibition.
I think that, I may be wrong, I can't remember myself. I think that, what do I think?
Because it was, I think, within a year, your first show at Howard Greenberg Gallery of black and white work.
Howard, who had seen my work before,
Oh.
if I may say so, without offending anyone, was not as interested as he became after I appeared in the two books.
Mm-hmm.
And then one day he called me and he came down to my apartment. And there was lots of stuff lying around. and he picked out a few hundred things, and he took a big box, and he left my apartment. And I thought to myself, I don't know what he's taking, I don't know where he's going. And so anyway, and then I think at the beginning, color was not, for some odd reason that I have never understood and I will never understand, color at certain points is looked down upon. If you study the history of art, you discover...
Even in painting?
In painting. You discover that there are periods when artists were considered too colorful. Michelangelo thought Titian was using too much color and ought to pay more attention to drawing. And it goes on and on. Of course, as far as I am concerned, I've always loved color. It seemed to me a perfectly normal, valid thing to do, and I didn't care that people were or were not doing it. I did things because I liked doing it. When I'm asked why did you do certain things, because I liked it.
Well, and certainly at that point, it wasn't a commercial concern. You weren't thinking about selling work.
No. Eventually, the recent period has gotten to be very, shall we say, colorful. There are books on color. They're discovering all sorts of people who did color.
But
It's
at the
as
time-
if color, we live in a world of color. We're surrounded by color.
But for the longest time, photography, especially serious photography, was thought to be strictly black and white.
That's because the academic people who suffer from the illusion that they know what they're talking about decided that, I mean, I have never questioned the value of black and white. I love drawings. If I sometimes have said that if I were rich, although someone told me I can't say that anymore, I can't say if. But anyway, the point is this, that I would buy drawings. I love drawings. I love black and white. I love Zen. Throughout history, there are many examples of beautiful things being done in black and white, but throughout history, there are many examples of things being done in color. And the fact that some people are foolish enough to belittle color is a problem they have. I
Well,
mean, Walker Evans made fun of color at a given moment, but then he spent a lot of time doing color himself.
Yeah.
Irving Penn said color was not that important, but then he did very beautiful color things. I think people are bamboozled into believing sometimes that black and white is superior.
Or more artistic.
Maybe more, whatever that means. I don't know what artistic means because, I mean, you can't say that Rubens is not artistic simply because he was more colorful than some of them.
Well, it's just, there was for the longest time a prejudice against color in photography. That
was.
didn't exist in the same way
Well,
in
see, I
any
wasn't,
other art.
I didn't allow, I had a struggle against the no people. I see the world is divided into people who say no. There are large groups of no people. They always say no. Whatever you want to do, it's no. I grew up in a house where I was punished and
Punished
told
for what?
for wanting to do certain things.
Oh.
When I say published, my father, I was quite young when I had the first show of my drawings. I don't know how I got it. I can't quite understand the whole thing. I didn't know or have a single friend who was an artist, but I was having a show, and when my father heard that I was having a show and there was an article being published on me, he sat at the table and cried and told me, now everyone will know.
No what?
Well, no, that, you know,
What?
You're doing, you're what, some kind of artist, something, I don't know.
Was that an embarrassment?
I was not surrounded with kindness or sympathy in the early years of my life. I read recently about Caillebotte. I had acquired a new book on Caillebotte, so it turned out his family was very well-to-do. And what intrigued me was this. The father was rich, so he built a 2-story house. And then when Caillebotte decided to become an artist, he added a 3rd floor. Now, the idea that a father would add a 3rd floor so that his son could be an artist is something that intrigued me.
It didn't happen in your life, unfortunately.
It didn't happen in my life. Anyway, but I'm not sure that when people say that I'm supposed to be a pioneer,
Oh.
and as a matter of politeness, I shouldn't insult people by denying that I'm a pioneer. However, the more you study in the past, you discover that there were people who used color. It's supposed to have been not done, but there were people who did it anyway.
Well, of course. And I think, one of the interesting things I think about our period now is this kind of reevaluation of early color, of all the people who did work in color commercially and not.
Well, art to me anyway, consists of people. In the 19th century, someone bought a Vermeer for $12. Now that would not happen now. And the question is, how was that possible? During Vermeer's lifetime, someone came out with a history of the period, and the person who was not included in that period was Vermeer. So art consists of endless re-evaluation. Someone is great, then they're forgotten, then they're revived, then they're forgotten again. People in the academic world who need to produce papers, discover artists who are neglected.
It's a business.
And it just goes on and on and on. Someone's great. Picasso's later work is not very good. He must have gone to pieces. However, recently there's been a reevaluation. Picasso's later work is now seen as fulfilling a very profound ambition that he had to work as a child, and there's a special flavor to it, and it's going for lots of money at auctions. So it just goes back and forward.
Well, and so, different people benefit and not from these sorts of things. Certainly, your career has had many twists and turns.
Yes.
And because I was first interested in your work as fashion work, and I know that this isn't an area that you were particularly excited to do, but you really were able to put your mold on something that it was really unique. That was that was not like anyone else's work in that period in the 60s.
Well, I met some people recently, or not so recently, and they worked for Avedon.
Yeah.
And they said to me, we used to be very interested in your work when it came out, and we would sit around in the studio discussing it. And I said to them, what a pity that I didn't know that, because it might have cheered me up at given moments when I was depressed and feeling useless and worthless.
Oh. But you were, I felt like, in the time that you were making fashion photos, you were really making a statement of your own style that wasn't being, if your pictures weren't being seen outside of fashion magazines, at least there you made
Well,
something that was uniquely you.
Avedon told Henry at some point.
Henry Wolf.
Yeah, I told Henry when he was leaving, he was talking about Saul, and he said, you know, Saul is his own person, and what he does is what he does, and it's not dependent on other people, and it's his own way of looking at things.
And it's not dependent on the fashion of the time or anything.
No, there have always been, you know, in every field, when someone is very like, there have been many people who worked like Penn. In fact, if you were an assistant or you worked for Penn for a while, you then went off and did Penn-like photographs and earned a good living doing imitations of Penn, and that was true of Avedon and of a lot of people. And but I wasn't aware. Henry did go to Europe, and he came back one day, and we were in a taxi, and he said, you know, there are people in Europe who admire your work. And I thought that was very nice. I was very pleased, and that was the end of that.
Oh. But didn't you, well, I should give this a little bit of context. The Henry that we're talking about is Henry Wolf, the art director, who first used Saul's work in Esquire. Yeah. Then when he took over Harper's Bazaar from Alexei Brodovich, used Saul Leiter very regularly at Harper's Bazaar in the 60s. And also when he went to Show magazine as the art director there, used your work there as well.
He became a very good friend. And sometimes when I'd had dinner already, Henry would call me up at the last moment and ask me to have dinner, and I'd have dinner again with him because he was lonely.
But was it important that you were in this context in fashion at that time? But at least
was it important?
Well, I guess I should say.
See, I have never. My aim in life. I've said this before. I've said that I've never had illusions of grandeur. I'm familiar with the history of art somewhat. I'm aware of the great things that have been done in the past. I don't suffer from the illusion that if I take a nice photograph, like some people do, they take a good photograph and they begin to think they're Rembrandts. Mm-hmm. That's not something that I have had. I mean, my aim in life was to pay my bills and to pay my light bill. My ambitions were not so exalted. I was not out to conquer the universe or the world. I didn't attach, I think, maybe the kind of importance to success that some people do. There are people who are driven by the notion they sacrifice everything for success. I didn't feel that way. I attached more importance to the idea that there might be someone who might love me and whom I might love. I cared more about certain friends of mine. I wasn't driven, so when a nice thing happened, I was pleased. I was not about being, I met a man the other day, or not the other day, I met somebody at the gallery and he said to me, you know, I own a photograph of yours, and when I get up in the morning, I look at it and it makes me happy. Mm-hmm. And I thought that was very nice. It meant I wasn't completely useless.
Hardly. Well, it's nice to bring.
I recently read, Michelangelo is writing, maybe it's Vasari. He's writing a letter and he talks, he's old and he's discouraged. And he says, I felt a kinship with him because he feels useless.
But you can't still feel useless at this point in your career, I hope.
I don't think I feel useless, but I'm not, you know, there are people in the world who luxuriate when they are given attention. They're people who love to have awards.
Well, what I'm sort of picking up from this is that
I just haven't. It's not. I knew that I was good at what I did, and I knew that sometimes, I said to
whether
someone,
you had recognition or not.
well, actually, the truth of the matter is, we have to revise the history of my early period. I rather quickly had people who admired my work. Not a lot, but I'd run into people who saw my work. And then I had, I went to see an art director, and he said, I wanted to see your work because someone told me you were a genius. He said, I don't think that you're a genius. I said, that's all right. I left.
Did he use you anyway, whether you were...
I can't remember. I don't think he did.
Okay.
So, but
I guess,
what are you supposed to do when you achieve some success? Are you supposed to look down on the universe? What are you supposed to do? What am I supposed to do?
Well, I would imagine you have all that in pretty good perspective since you had success and not success in your life.
Yes, I am very familiar with having my lights turned off and having the IRS lock up my studio and threaten to cart my things. I've had all kinds of experiences, and I've had periods where I appealed to people for help and didn't work too well. So, but I mean, I don't, Henry once said something to me again. He said, I've never known anyone who has been so, I can't remember how he put it. He said, who's been so indifferent to the opportunities he's had.
Oh.
And when I look back on my life, I sometimes ask myself why, when Betty Parsons offered me a show, and at the time she was showing Jackson Pollock and Rothko and all these people, why didn't I? And she wanted me to frame the pictures, and what happened, and why didn't I do it? And I think I might have been in one of my depressed periods. I have suffer occasionally from depression. And maybe, I don't know, I can't explain it. But basically, there are people in the world who have a gift for careers. They know how to succeed. They know how to advance themselves. They know how to, and there are people who don't have it. And sometimes very fine. Lou Farrer was a photographer whose work I admired greatly. And so one day I was talking to one of the editors on Harper's Bazaar, and she was telling me how crazy I was. So I said to her, instead of thinking he's so crazy, you ought to buy some of his prints now because they're going to be valuable. And she said, are you out of your mind? Buy his work? You're crazy.
Lou Farrer.
Yeah, Lou Farrer. And I thought he was an exceptional photographer. So I don't see why you can't be good at something without taking yourself so seriously.
Well, obviously you've had a career where you've sort of just had a way of keeping yourself working when you needed to.
I managed somehow, I guess, to survive, and I shared my life with Soames, and we had moments where, in spite of all the problems, we had a tendency to be indifferent to the problems, and an inability to concentrate on misery properly.
That sounds like a very useful thing.
and a tendency to enjoy life.
Oh.
So, unless you are, and I don't think that's such a bad thing, you know.
No, but
I don't know. You see, I think this is a new period. And when I remember how I left my parents' home and came to New York and had no money, and I dropped out of school, and my brother came to see me, and he said to me, you know, so you're crazy. You think that people ought to be happy. You think people should be happy. You're crazy. That's not what the world's about. Life is much more complicated.
life is misery?
Well, he didn't mean it that way, and he was quite nice in his own way. But when I look back on the fact, Margaret said to me one day recently that if she hadn't had a college degree, Howard would not have hired her. I'm probably embarrassing her if I say this. And I said, well, why couldn't he have hired you? Because he liked you, because he thought you would be good for the gallery. As it turned out, she is very good for the gallery. Does the fact that you went to college where nothing you'd studied prepared you for dealing with the problems of someone working in. And the history of our time is a history of many people who've never gone to college, they've never gone even to high school, and they've become...
And you? I can't remember what your career was like there.
What?
Did you go to college?
I went for 1 year, and then I dropped out because I was so unhappy at home. My brother David went on. I was expected to do what was expected. My father thought I should know at least 10, 15, 20 languages, and I should be able to read Greek and Latin, and of course Hebrew without question, and I should know the Talmud. When I was 8 years old, I came back from Poland, and my father asked me questions about Maimonides, the 2 volumes, and I answered correctly on everything that he asked me, and he looked at me and he patted me on the head, and he thought, well, he's going off in the right direction. And then I went to pieces, and I became indifferent to certain things, and I didn't find the religious life attractive, or the observances, even though I respect the tradition.
But you went into painting at that point.
Yeah, I started to paint a little bit because a friend of mine had a girlfriend who painted, and one day we went to visit her, and I saw she was doing paintings, and I thought that was very nice. So I decided to buy some stuff, and I made a copy of, I bought a little book on Vermeer, and I made a copy, and then I liked it, and well, it wasn't that good, but I liked it anyway. And I decided to have it framed, and I think it cost $6 to have framed. And I didn't have the $6 for a long time, so finally when I did have the $6, I went back to the framer, and he told me someone had stolen it, and I was terribly pleased.
Someone has your work.
And someone had stolen my painting. So then I used to go to the University of Pittsburgh Library, and I'd sit there for 2-3 summers. I'd sit there and look at different things. I had a wonderful collection of books, and I got to like all kinds of things without knowing a great deal about them, whether it was Peruvian textiles or the whole history of art, different manifestations. I ended up finding that I responded to certain things without being taught about it, or without having people explain to me why I should like it or shouldn't like it.
So when you first came to New York, you came as a painter? Did you?
I came I came as a refugee from my father's house. My aim in life was to get away from the home where I felt unhappy. I didn't know what I was going to do. I've read somewhere that I came to be a painter. Well, I didn't come to be a painter. I came to get away from being tortured to death.
But in spite of that, you became a painter.
Yeah, I became a painter, but then I met Richard Poussaint, and Richard was, I think, an unusual artist. I think they referred to him as a second-rate, not second-rate, second-generation abstract expressionist, and I admired his work, and we became friends. And Richard fiddled and piddled and puddled with all. He liked to fix clocks, and he liked to, and he took photographs, and he bleached them. And he liked, I think, Coburn, and he did all kinds of things. And so I began to think of maybe that could be a way to earn a living. My mother kept me
taking
afloat.
photographs.
Without my mother, I would have sunk into a bog of hopeless despair, and I would have disintegrated.
Meaning she supported you?
She sent me money to keep me alive, and then occasionally I'd have an odd job. I had a job in a cheese store, and they fired me because I was not attentive to the needs of a cheese buyer. And I didn't.
Well, that would seem essential for a cheese store.
And then I worked in a slaughterhouse that my friend Harold's father got me a job. And I used to have I was in a room where the head came down, and then there was a nice man who cut the head in half. And so one day we went to lunch, and he said to me, "You know, so I don't feel this is right for you."
And you agreed.
and I agreed, so I left.
So,
And at times, I didn't know what would happen. And then I remember a man who came from a wealthy family. We got to be friendly. And his sister wanted to be photographed, or needed a photo, I can't remember anymore. So I took some pictures. So anyway, what was I saying?
well, let's wait before you continue that. Let's get back to photography. I mean, because I'm curious about how you ended up focusing on photography, and ended up having a real language in photography.
How I developed a real language?
real, a vision of something that is really your own way of seeing.
I think the reason I developed something on my own, that I didn't know anything better. I did what I wanted to do, and for some reason, which is a difficult thing to explain to people, why is it that some people, Monet said somewhere that if you want to be an artist, you paint and paint and paint and paint. And then you have a choice. You get better, you don't get better. And if you don't get better, there's not too much you can do about it.
But you got better.
I think I suppose I'm going to be vain when I say, I think from the very beginning, maybe because I didn't know any better, I did certain things. I was attracted. It's hard to explain. It's like trying to explain to someone, why are you attracted to abstract painting?
But do you think that your photography has a lot to do with your way of seeing painting as well? I mean,
That my what?
that your photography and your painting share a certain kind of abstract.
Sometimes I think I've thought, and I don't know how true it is, I've sometimes thought, well, maybe I would have been a better photographer if I were not a painter. And then sometimes I've thought, well, maybe if I were not wasting my time doing photography, maybe I'd be a better painter. But in the end, I did both. And
And you continue to do both, right?
And I continue to do both because I like doing them. I enjoy taking a brush and using it on a surface, making a mark, and then making another mark, and then it's a little bit almost like jazz, you know? You don't know what you're going to do, and you have a blank surface, and you make a little mark, and then you make another little mark, and then you make something here, and then gradually it changes, and sometimes it becomes something, and then you put it away, and then you forget about it, and then 3 years later you pick it up, and you continue to work on it. And so...
Well, let me get to that point, because one of the things that strikes me about your work and your career is that, in a sense, you did put a lot of stuff away. And
I did what?
You put a lot of stuff away.
Yeah.
You almost forgot what you made.
Yes, it's
and
true.
You're now in a sort of constant place of rediscovering your own work, and sort of
Well,
going
I
back.
know it's there.
Well, but we
I've-
don't.
I've forgotten about it. There's too much.
Well, I mean, this is why
I open
you know,
up a portfolio and I look at something. And I try to remember. I don't know whether I have Alzheimer's or what. I can't remember when I did it. I can't remember, but I know it's mine.
Mhm. But this is what, you know, I think what's valuable and what's exciting about this, your career at this point, is this kind of gradual reveal of all this work that has been kind of,
Even though I think I'm very lazy, I did a lot of stuff.
you did a lot of stuff.
I did a lot of stuff, too much. I admire artists who did a small amount, like Vermeer.
Uh-huh.
Maybe he only did 35. He might have done more. There was a fire. Maybe it got this, certain. Sometimes I think if you want to have a career, I would recommend to people, make a little package. It shouldn't be too big. And take that little package and carry it around and beat people over the head with it. And eventually you may end up winning whatever it is that you want to win.
What might that be?
Well, I don't know. I mean, sometimes it strikes me that there are a tremendous number of people in the world who are driven with the idea that life has only meaning if you succeed greatly at something. And I think that sometimes there's something very nice about people who don't inflict their own ambitions and drives on the rest of the members of the human race, and they don't do anything. There's something, I think, noble about doing nothing.
But I don't think you'd be satisfied completely with doing
What?
nothing. I said, I hope you wouldn't be satisfied completely with doing nothing.
No, I have a bad habit of doing things.
Well, are you still taking photographs, and will we ever see them? Your most recent.
My gallery, I think, thinks of me. You know, galleries usually decide what is, I don't know how to put it, but they decide what you are sometimes. This is you. This is the real you. This stuff here, this is not you. What, you did it? You like doing it? That's okay, but it isn't the real you. I am telling you what the real you is. This is the real you right here. We have convinced the world what you are, and we are so for the first time in my life at this late date, I don't have to worry about paying my bills. I can pay my bills.
Thank you. I'm glad to hear that.
And I regret not being able to share it with my friend Soames, because she and I had long periods of being unable to pay my bills. A lot of it had to do with the fact that I was irresponsible.
You were?
I am sometimes irresponsible.
That's hard to believe.
Instead of paying my taxes, I buy some books.
Oh. I see you at Strand often.
Yes. So I'm irresponsible. Sometimes I owe money and I don't pay. Recently, I'm in the pleasant position of not having to worry, and I think it's a terribly nice thing not to have to worry. So in that sense, I'm very grateful to Howard, and I'm very grateful to Margaret for helping me achieve that pleasant condition of not caring about bills. It's nice to have a group. Soames and I used to sometimes run into some money, and we'd have bill holidays where we try to pay
Everything at the same time.
pay all at the same time. So anyway, that can be very, very nice. I have never looked down on the rich. I've never envied them. My father used to have many friends who were very, very rich. And he used to say things like, given the fact that Charlie, if he wanted to, could have been a bum and spent his time having a good time, he spent his time giving money away.
Oh.
And Charlie said to my father, Charlie Rosen said to my father, you know, Rabbi, it's not easy to give money away. It's hard work.
Oh. Well.
It's hard work. So
I'm
anyway,
going to pull you back to photography again. I'm
Yes.
curious. I'm sorry.
You see, the problem is that, okay.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, yeah.
Because I'm curious about if you, I know you go out all the time. Do you look at shows? Are there current artists or photographers who interest you?
Well, I think, let's put it this way, I don't have any favorite. You see, I know, I like the whole idea, for instance, of Vivian Maier. I think that's
I was going to ask you about her.
Yes, because I own, and I even own I own a self-portrait of Vivian Maier. I love outsider artists. I like artists who don't fit. I like Castle, who was a mute.
Right.
And I love certain people who are not part of the academic world, who are not trained in certain ways, and who ended up like Rousseau. Rousseau was is a great, one of the great modern artists. Was not, you know, he's the one of the early people in that field. So I love the idea, and I come across. I sometimes up at the New York Times and find they're reproducing beautiful pictures.
And reportage, you mean?
Reportage, beautiful pictures. I can conceive very easily over a period of time one could have an exhibition of beautiful photographs that were reproduced by the New York Times.
I want to go back to Vivian Maier.
I think there are lots of people. Right now, while you and I are sitting and talking, someone is taking a very fine photograph somewhere.
But you're not going to let them do it here.
Because I'm sick and tired of being. I'm not. I haven't. You know, there were periods in my life where no one photographed me, and now I sit down and people shove their cameras at me. I'm not a movie star. I'm not a celebrity. What?
But you're more interesting. First, let me go back to Vivian Maier. I want to talk just a little bit about her because, just to describe her in case people don't know the work, a woman who photographed all her life, essentially, never showed her work in her lifetime, almost never made prints in her lifetime, worked as a caregiver, a nanny, and mostly in Chicago, and was discovered when her accumulated negatives and materials were sold because she couldn't pay her locker rent. And she
couldn't
died.
pay her locker.
Right. Everything was in a locker that was sold and bought by.
Was she alive? She was alive.
She was alive when that happened, but she died before people discovered who she was.
Yeah.
So here's this kind of, a long career as an artist, completely kind of hidden away from the world. She seemed to have no interest in showing her work, and yet she was quite a good photographer, and has been rediscovered now since her death.
To me, she represents, if I may put
Yeah.
it without being pretentious, she represents purity in art. She did it not because she benefited from it. I don't know if she ever sold a print in her life. She did it because she loved to do it.
Well, it's when I started thinking about her, it reminds me in a lot of ways of a lot of the work that you made was for yourself. You weren't showing it.
I had people tell. I used to have a junk room when I had a studio at 155th Avenue, and I kept a lot of stuff there. And every now and then, someone would say to me, "What are you keeping all the slides for? There's so many. Why don't you get rid of them? You can't. Nothing's going to happen with them. Get rid of them. Get rid of this. Get rid of that."
And you.
And
you
I didn't get rid of it. I met a man, a friend of mine who died very young, went to Paris. And in Paris, he met a man who was a commercial artist who used to have models come to model for him. And he had this guy who would live nearby who would come by and draw from the model.
Mm-hmm.
And he did hundreds and hundreds of drawings, and he threw them all out. I mean, the owner. And the man who did the drawings was Modigliani.
Oh.
But the guy who threw the drawings out was still proud of the fact. He didn't care for Modigliani, and he was very proud of having thrown hundreds and hundreds of drawings out.
I would like to let people ask questions, if you're open to that.
Yes, I can. Yes. It's okay.
Okay. So if there are two mics on either side, although this is a fairly small room, so if you have a good loud voice, if you'll raise your hand and if you would like to ask a question, I'm sure we can address it. Anybody? Yes? You're going to have to talk louder, or you're going to have to come to a mic.
You started telling us a story when you started to do pictures of your friend's sister.
I can hear.
I don't remember this story.
Doing pictures of your
A friend's sister.
At the beginning of your, when you discovered photography, could you tell us more about this story?
Do you remember this?
What?
You started talking about taking pictures of a friend's sister, and then I cut you off.
A friend's sister?
Uh-huh.
I don't remember anymore.
Okay, so let's move on. Anything else? I hope more than one person has a question. Yes, please speak up.
I will speak up.
Okay.
I noticed in all your photographs that you've really documented New York City for all of these years. What was your favorite neighborhood to photograph in?
My favorite what?
Neighborhood. Did you
My
have
favorite neighborhood?
one? Uh-huh.
I don't think I had a favorite neighborhood. I don't, even though I've lived in New York for most of my life, I can't say that I know New York. Occasionally when I'm in the street and someone asks me
For directions?
for direction, I tell them I don't live here.
In fact, we're neighbors in the East Village, and I know you've lived in the same building for how many years?
Since 1952.
Okay.
And,
So I hope you know that neighborhood fairly well.
yes, a lot of the things that I did, some of the good work that I did right in my own neighborhood. Sometimes looking around me, I didn't feel that you had to go to Europe to do photography or you had to travel, even though I thought maybe traveling would be nice when I hadn't traveled. But I think, to put it very simply, I think the world is full of endless things, and there are many beautiful things around us, and people have a way and a talent for not noticing it because they're lazy and because they're spoiled and because they lack the imagination to see that what is around them is actually sometimes very beautiful.
So, but what, I'm going to inject a question. What drew you always to work on the street? And even almost all your fashion photography was on the street as well, rather than at studio work. What appeals to you about the street?
The street?
Mhm.
Well, things are going on. It's like the street is like a ballet. You never know what is going to happen. There are things that I like in the street. I was never crazy about white or, you know, I mean, I'm Abaddon loved, you know, plain background and a look of, I would work sometimes in the studio because I was asked to by editors who wanted to have lunch and they wanted to be sure that they were next to a telephone. This is before the iPhone. So they preferred not to go out into the street, you see.
Oh,
They were interested. So anyway.
any other questions? Yes, back there.
I just was wondering, it seems like you work shooting through like foggy windows. I was just wondering how you got the idea to do
What?
that.
I
Um,
can't.
It was maybe, were you trying to get photography to feel more like painting?
He said the question was that you often photograph through foggy windows and sort of you always have lots of indirection and reflections and interruptions in your work. And he said, were you trying to have something that resembled more like painting? Some
I don't think I don't think, when I did photography, I wasn't thinking of painting. I have been told that some of my photographs maybe indicate that I'm a painter. But when I did photography is about finding things, and painting is different. It's about making something. In the time that you can do, I sometimes am amazed by how much you can do as a photographer, how much quicker and easier it is as a medium, you know. But I don't know, maybe, I don't think that I thought of trying to achieve the effects. When I look at certain things, I find them attractive or interesting or beautiful, and I take pictures. Sometimes they're good, sometimes they're not so good. Sometimes.
A question in the front.
Just a little follow-up on that. Regarding the idea of painting, it seems like in your photographs you really are able to see things on a two-dimensional way. So in relationship to abstract photography, you may not have been thinking about painting, but the fact that you were able to conceive of things in two dimensions.
What?
I'm just wondering if, like when I look at this picture, for example, in a lot of your work, I see a kind of understanding of things in three dimensions and in two dimensions, like a flatness, the way abstract painting is, and then also a dimensionality or a perspective element, the way photography is sort of simultaneously.
Even though I think, maybe I'm mistaken, even though I'm intelligent, whatever I mean by that, In my work, I'm not, I listened to, I think it was Joel Meyerowitz or someone like that was on the radio and he was talking, and I thought to myself, he sounds like someone who had just finished a course in deconstruction and maybe had gone on to read the Rita and a number of people like that. And I don't think that way. When I am photographing something, I'm not thinking of single dimension, triple dimension, four. I don't think that way. I think there's something and I take a picture. If it's if it inspires, I am very suspicious of the analysis of artworks.
Oh.
I
And he's looking at me.
I'm very suspicious of the analysis of artworks because I think, as I've said before, the explanation for certain things are not the real reasons for certain things.
I tend to agree with you.
And
Especially when it
there
comes
is
to-
an element of mystery.
Well,
I mean, why is Matisse Matisse, let's say? Why did Cartier-Bresson have a way of framing a picture? Why is Cortez whatever it is? Why are people who are very good? And why are there people who are not very good? Every now and then,
and a lot of
there's
them.
a man I met in the Strand,
Uh-huh.
and he brought me, he's intelligent, and he likes to look at art books.
Mhm.
And he's even attracted to the religious world. He told me one day when I told him that I didn't enjoy the synagogue as much as I did a visit to a nice gallery, he said to me, tradition.
Oh.
Tradition. But anyway, and he has been working all this. Oh, his wife, the reasons why he didn't, this is something I'm not making up. The reason why his wife died of Alzheimer's.
Oh.
And because of all the expenses connected with her, this kept him from being a great artist. Now, I couldn't quite figure out how that all worked together. So I said to him, I'd like to see your work. So one day he comes to the Strand with a packet, with a bag, a number of bags, and there are these works of his. And I believe that if his wife had been healthy and he hadn't had to spend any money on her, he just wasn't very good. I've sometimes...
I was afraid that was where it was going.
But sometimes there are people, sometimes it amazes me, there's certain people, they're not very good, but they go on working and working till the last moment.
Well, there's something to be said for ambition.
No, there's something to be avoided when you have too much ambition. I mean, there are people in the world who live in a state of confusion about the realities, but you can't tell them that because if you're kind, you can't destroy some fantasy that they have. Like this man, as he showed me his work, he pointed out how great each thing was.
Oh.
and I didn't know what to do. So,
But I'm sure you weren't unkind.
not complete. I might have.
Are there any other questions? Yes, let me, right here, please.
I noticed the people in the photographs that we're seeing are at a distance, they're looking away, they're through a glass. In other words, there's an impersonality with which you're treating these people.
Impersonal?
Encounters in a composition. Is this the real you?
What does that
It's a
mean?
selection made by
Well, I don't think. Do you think that Avedon is really intimate with his subjects because he puts them against the white wall and he hacks?
think of a street photographer like Helen Levitt who interacts with her people, or even Cartier-Bresson who interacts with his people.
Yeah.
And I don't see
You
that.
feel that they are closer to the people than I am, that I am more removed.
That's what
It's
not
a-
closer, they're not personal with them, but they don't
To
know them
me,
personally, but they're interacting. They're
People are, you mean I'm not, you see, there's a kind of photography where the person is given the most prominence. Because after all, people are more important than cheesecake. People are more
Debatable.
important than someone thought Cézanne wasn't a great artist because he painted apples. He wasn't painting people. I have pleasant connections with people, and what I do in my, I don't know, maybe, what should I do? Should I bring them away from the fog that surrounds them, the mist that they are lost in? Should I bring them out and let them, should I make them stronger? What
That's-
should I do?
That's not,
It's not a critique, it's just asking you,
What?
yeah,
this is your stance.
This is my what?
Your
Stance.
your attitude towards humanity. The most
no, I think,
But you see, you don't really know my photographs that well, and no one knows them. But there are many. I could, if I wanted to, I could produce a book full of photographs of people where there are nothing else going on but the people in the photograph.
yeah, I mean,
But
there
then
are exceptions.
What?
There are exceptions to the sort of describe, but anyway, I think we should take on another question. Yes, back here. You need to talk louder.
I was curious about some of the artists who you knew in addition to Poussin art, in the 50s in New York.
Artists you were friendly with.
I wasn't, I had a great deal of respect for the artists who I thought were important. I met them, I saw them in openings, I sometimes talked to them. I saw Jackson Pollock looking at the work of a woman who's forgotten today, but who was doing overall paintings. I don't like to pretend that I was intimate with a lot of these people. I had tremendous, they were around. There was not, you walked out in the street and there was de Kooning holding his daughter, or you walked into the Tanager and they were everywhere. It didn't, when something is given a historical importance, some people think, oh, you couldn't have known him. He's too important for you to have known, but they were people and they were artists and they were around and you saw them and you went to openings and they were there and sometimes you talked to them. I talked to Duchamp at one point. I told him that I thought at an opening, I said to him, your shovel is now romantic.
What did you mean by that?
I meant that the shovel was at one point meant to be a pedestrian object, But with age, it became a more romantic. The shovel wasn't like every other. The shovel had acquired a touch of romance, and he went like this. He threw his arms up, and that was it. If I were a different kind of person, there were many opportunities to talk. A man called me today. He wants to photograph me. Why? Why he wants to photograph me. He knows someone that I knew many years ago who lived in New York, who's back in South America. So I asked him to call me back. Later in the day, Ralph Gibson, who I never talked to in my life. Oh, I forgot, I did talk to him.
Okay.
It's unfair. I talked to him once when he told me he admired my work, and I said, I didn't know that anyway.
Okay.
So he tried to get me, I thought it was strange, he tried to get me to let this man photograph me, even though I told him I'm sick and tired of being photographed. I'm not a movie star. I've been photographed enough.
Okay. Sorry. Can we, this may be,
Yeah. Is
So-
it true you use those films like past the expiration dates? Which
What?
Is it true you use films past expiration dates, which give your photos the unique tones and color palette?
I can't hear you.
I'm asking, I can hear it. She's asking, do you use and deliberately film that's past its expiration date in order to give your images a certain quality?
There were times when I was quite young, when I had very little money, and I sometimes borrowed, sometimes bought film that was expired, and I liked the results, and I would buy film that was expired, but sometimes I used normal film. I'm not a person who is rigid, who's committed to one way. Sometimes I try something, sometimes I try something else, sometimes I try something else. I'm not a mannerist. There are people who develop a manner, and they have this manner, and they impose it on their work, and sometimes it is good, and sometimes it gets to be boring. But I would try different things, and sometimes I failed, and sometimes I didn't fail, and sometimes something worked out.
And more often than not, it seems.
Yeah.
Only one more question. I'm sorry. Yes?
You know what,
You really have to talk up.
I'm curious because you've mentioned Vermeer many times tonight, and
Vermeer.
And I feel that you had a lot of the same elegance and color that he had, and he was always observing scenes, and I see a great parallel in your work to Vermeer. Do you feel that way? Do you feel that he struck
What
you
is
from
she
Vermeer?
saying? Does she think that I am?
She's asking, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to sort of compress your, she asked if you had, that you mentioned Vermeer a number of times, and I know that you've talked before about his influence on you. Do you, and that he...
I don't think he influenced.
No?
I think Vermeer is one of the great artists in the history of art.
Okay. But do you think that has he had any influence on your way of seeing
I
color
wouldn't
in the
mind
world?
I wouldn't mind if he did, but I don't think he wasted his time on me. You know, Renoir I think said that the lace maker is the most beautiful painting in the world.
Mm.
He loved the lace maker. He said it was the most beautiful thing in the world. I don't put myself in the... I'm sorry to say this, but I don't put I'm not comfortable as a colleague of Vermeer.
Okay.
He's one of the truly great, unusual artists in the history of art.
So, Saul, I think I'm going to close this down, if you
Oh,
don't
good.
mind.
Yes.
Thank you so much for talking to me, for letting us see some new work.
Yes.
Uh,
Yeah.
and thank you all for coming.